Hello, my dear friends. We're here for another grammar session. It's colons and semicolons this time. Quick word of advice first. Let's make sure you have your handout in front of you, and let's tell the difference between a colon and a semicolon. Follow along with me, add to your notes as we go. A colon is the one with the two dots. A lot of people get these two things confused, and so I'll show you a nifty way to remember it. Colons have two dots, and a semicolon is the one with the dot and the comma underneath it. Okay, dot and comma. So to me, a semicolon looks a lot more like a semi-truck. If you think about those trucks that you see out on the road, they have a short little cab, and then they have the big long trailer behind it like this, and they're rolling down the road. And just in that same way that you have a semi-truck, we can also look at that same shape of the truck that we have here. I'm going to do a quick grouping here so we can move that whole thing around, because then when I turn this sideways, you'll see that it looks very much the same as a semicolon, right? The short and the long. So semi-truck and semicolon, that's what I compare those two as. We use them differently. Don't get them mixed up. Let's see how we work on these things. First rule, 8.1. Use a colon after a full sentence that includes a list or a quote. Here's the big clue. It is after a full sentence that is meant to introduce this list or this quote. So in high school, he played the following sports. I could stop right there, and what we have in front here is a full sentence. Now, of course, he played the following sports. Someone's going to want to know what those sports are, and that's why we need that colon. That colon essentially replaces the words "and they are." And sometimes we have some strange noises that we use when we use punctuation, at least here in this class. I always do a little, when I do like this, "and they are," colon. All right. And so we have a full sentence. I need an "and they are." I realized I just wrote the wrong two letters here because I'm trying to talk and write and do too much at once. And they are, ... And then it gives us the list. So consider Franklin D. Roosevelt's words to Congress, colon, and those words are, quote, "We have had the lesson before us over and over again. Nations that were not ready and were unable to get ready found themselves overrun by the enemy." We again have a full sentence before here. Consider Franklin D. Roosevelt's words to Congress. I could stop there and it's a perfectly good sentence. But because we want to know what those words are, we get this idea, "and those words are," and then it gives us his words. If we reworded those things, we wouldn't need the colon. If we were to just say, in high school, he played baseball, basketball, football, and tennis. We don't need a colon at all. And if we just said that Franklin D. Roosevelt said, comma, quote, we don't need a colon there either. So the big clue is that it's got a full sentence before the quote or the list. So if I look at some of these items, let's do a couple quick practices, placing where colons are needed. I have a few favorite teams, the Bears, the White Sox, and the Rockets. Before I get to a list, I check that I have a full sentence before that, and I do. I have a few favorite teams. Could be a perfectly good sentence right there. But you might want to know what those teams are, hence the colon that I'm going to say, "and those teams are the Bears, the White Sox, and the Rockets." She had 3 personality flaws: pride, selfishness, and a temper. So when I see that this is a list using commas, which is nice because we just talked about comma rules, and I see that what comes before is a full sentence, she had 3 personality flaws, and those flaws are, that's where I'm going to put a colon. The letter to his firm began as follows. Here comes what the letter said. Gentlemen, we received our last order in May 1998. The singers will be you, Pam, and Becky. Now I see a list going on here. But when I look in front, it is not a full sentence. If I just say the singers will be, that's not a full sentence, so I don't want to use colon here. We're going to say that there is none needed. The idea that we don't need a colon, remember, go through those checks. What's before needs to be a full sentence first. And this one is not a full sentence if I were to stop there. Article 1, Section 1 of the Constitution of the United States reads, quote, all legislative powers herein granted shall be vested, and on and on. And so I need to check what comes before it. Article 1, Section 1 of the Constitution of the United States reads, well, there's one of those signal words. And if you remember way back in our quotes unit, we talked about there being a signal word. And if there's a signal word out in front, that signal word is what's going to actually prevent it from needing a colon here. So when we have a signal word, the signal word is what tells us that we're going to use a comma if it's there. Words like said or shouted or commented or yelled. So instead of a colon here, we actually need a comma right here. If it has a signal word, we're going to use a comma. Alrighty, some good practice going on. Let's take a look at two, I think, easier rules that go with colons. We're talking just colons today. We're going to use one after the introduction of a formal letter. Now, a letter to something informal, to your aunt or to your neighbor or your best friend, you're going to still use that comma. But it's considered more formal to use a colon after the dear so-and-so. So if I'm writing to the president, that should be a pretty formal letter. And that means I want to use a colon for it. This also might be something like if you are writing your application for college and you are writing to the application committee and saying, hey, I'd really like a scholarship. So you might say, Dear Scholarship Application Committee, colon, I really would like your money. And the last one that you're probably pretty familiar with, we're going to use a colon in time when we have hours and minutes. So 2:45 and 3:00. But when we write those things out, like 3 o'clock or 10 after 6, we wouldn't use a colon when it's in words like that. So I'll never see like a 3:00. That doesn't happen ever. So instead, we're going to keep it only when it has digits for numbers and minutes, and the colon separates those two ideas. So a couple quick practices. There has been no change in our plans. We will leave at 1000 p.m., which we know doesn't exist in time. So that means this has to be 10:00. To the chairman of the board. Sounds like a pretty formal letter. I might be asking for a job. I'm going to use a colon there. We can't set an alarm for 445. That sounds more like a temperature on an oven. So instead, I'm going to use my insert mark and make sure I put a colon in there. If football practice was changed from 3 to 2:30, we don't need a colon here at the 3 because there's no minutes that are identified. But we do have hours and minutes here at 2:30, so we need a colon in between there. And last but not least, when we have a letter we don't know who to address it to whom it may concern, gets a colon because that's pretty formal. Now on the back of your page should be some practices. Please check out this mixed practice. Our main focus here is that we are putting colons in the appropriate place. Focus on just the colons only. You can probably already guess that coming up next week is going to be a look at our semicolons. But for this activity, you should only be using the colon and putting it in the appropriate place. Read carefully, watch for those full sentences. Good luck, and please do your best.